just going to take you through a few tools and practical approaches, really building on what we had this morning. We had some really good conversations in the breakout rooms. I hope you did as well, about some of the obstacles, some of the opportunities, and we really hope that this next session will support communities, as well as being a resource for local authorities as they're collaborating with communities and other stakeholders in having those conversations about place and land reuse. I work in the policy team at the Scottish Land Commission. I've been closely involved in the work of the Vacant Derelict Land Task Force, and I'm joined by Gemma Campbell, who will talk you through our programme of good practice. So just by way of background, the Scottish Land Commission set up the Vacant Derelict Land Task Force together with CPAT in 2018. They took a strategic approach to addressing vacant and derelict land. That includes vacant and derelict land that currently exists, but we're also thinking about the creation of new vacant and derelict land and how to prevent that. So we put forward a set of recommendations in 2020, and I thought it'd just be useful to highlight our statement of intent. That was our original document as we set up the task force, to help show the policy direction that we were taking. And a big part of the recommendations would have focused on making better use of data, to focus on persistent and problematic sites with productive potential. There's a lot of P's there. But essentially this is really about some of the points you made earlier about the gathering of evidence to help intervention. The next set of recommendations would focus more on how we align policy processes and funding processes to help deliver against our vacant derelict land priorities. The third set of recommendations was looking at how we can deliver this, and the deliverability of this on the ground. So that includes funding as well as other mechanisms. And the final and fourth set of recommendations that we would then develop was focused very much on how we create a socially responsible approach to land reuse, so preventing more sites from being abandoned. And today's session, as well as next week's, which is all around activating your estate, we'll have a focus on thinking more long term about preventing a new legacy of vacant derelict land from being created. So in regards to culture change, the reason why we felt that it was important to focus on this, and why the Land Commission has a role in this as well, is related to the fact that yes, there will be policy responses. There are legislative tools such as compulsory sales orders, which haven't been introduced yet, but could potentially be really game changing. Are all part of ways to address existing vacant derelict sites. However, there's a big part that I think we can play in changing the culture and actually starting to make those connections. For example, we talked about skills exchange, sharing knowledge and resources. So there are quite innovative solutions that could be part of creating a culture of good practice around land reuse. So this session will really focus on that, and to support the approach that landowners and land managers can take, as well as other users of land. We find that the land rights and responsibility statement is a really helpful set of principles that landowners and managers and users of land can abide by to help prevent the creation of a legacy of vacant and derelict land. And at this point, I'll hand over to Gemma. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathie. So as Kathie's mentioned, we've got the land rights and responsibility statement. So this is a really helpful framework for the work that we do, and it underpins what we do in the Good Practice programme. So this session is about the tools and resources that we have, and this is a really great starting point, and it is going to be how I frame some of the things I talk about. So we move on to the next slide. I'll talk to you a little bit about the Good Practice programme. So as I've just said, it's underpinned by the land rights and responsibility statement, and there are a few things that we do and can support public bodies, land managers, landowners, communities, anyone with an interest in land really with. So we have published a series of protocols and guidance. We have got 8 at the moment, covering a wide range of topics, looking at diversification, at negotiated transfer of land to communities. We've got one on good stewardship, and we have a 9th one coming up, which will be on natural capital. So the protocols and the guidance, and there are templates and route maps and things that go with them, are fantastic tools for understanding a bit more about how the land rights and responsibilities statement and the principles that are set out in the statement can apply in your own setting. They're really there to help you understand the actions you can take, and what reasonable expectations look like, in terms of both rights and responsibilities. They're a great starting point as a landowner and manager for understanding what communities might reasonably expect of you. So I will go on to talk about the principles from the statement and the issues that we've, the opportunities that we have, the tools that we have that can help you with these, but I'll just touch on the other bullet points at the moment. So we've got a wide range of case studies on the website. We've heard some really fantastic examples over today, over this morning and last week, and we've got lots more coming up over the next couple of weeks. But case studies are so helpful to see what works, what are other people doing. And I know we've had a bit of discussion in the chat this morning about when things don't work, and it would be great to get some case studies that touch on those things, but much harder to get people to agree to do those. We also carry out training and workshops. We will do tailored workshops. We'll work one-on-one with organisations to help them understand specific issues, explore anything that's going on in the local area, things that are really relevant and helpful for them. We also offer support with strategies and policies. If it's something you're developing in-house, you're looking at your processes for some of the issues that have been touched on this morning, we're always more than happy to provide you with a land rights and responsibilities perspective on that, and feed in on what the Commission thinks, and maybe further examples we're aware of, people we can put you in contact with. We have been carrying out a pilot of a self-assessments process, and this is really built around the land rights and responsibility statement and the framework, looking at what you do well, what else can be done, but I'll touch on that. I've got a slide that I'll go into a bit more detail on that later. And we also deal with casework and inquiries in the Good Practice programme, and that's something that, if you've ever got a question, you're facing a situation, either as a community member or as a member of staff at a public body, that there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you're wondering about something, you need to know who to speak to. You aren't sure what's reasonable in a situation, or you're having difficulties coming to a solution with someone else, that is something we can consider supporting you with. We can signpost on to other organisations. So just to encourage you, if you do have anything like that, just to get in touch with us. So I will ask Kathie to move on to the next slide, and I will speak to you about the first of the principles that I've got on the slide. I'm not following the order that's in the statement, but that's just to make things a bit easier to follow. So principle 2 states that there should be a more diverse pattern of land ownership and tenure, with more opportunities for citizens to own, lease and have access to land. And that fits really nicely with this week's theme of collaborating with communities. So collaboration with stakeholders and between different organisations, it's a key element of things like successful community wealth building, which I will plug for week 4, we'll be talking about in more detail. And diversification is great of adding value and creating mutual benefits in a place. And working together really offers a chance to share objectives and priorities, share information and data. And it's a really important part of creating a healthy, thriving place. So a wide and diverse availability of land and buildings allows businesses, organisations, individuals and communities to pursue projects of all scales and purposes. And access to land can provide a wide range of benefits, and we've seen some of the fantastic projects this morning that are doing just that and realising those benefits for their communities. So really this is about more inclusive, more diverse ownership and management. So we move on to the next slide, what that might look like in your organisation, in your setting, some of the things you can do that would contribute to that aim. Would be looking at how your land and property is managed, and whether there are ways you could deliver further benefits, work collaboratively with other people, work collaboratively with communities, and to look at more productive use of assets and to deliver greater benefits. It's about identifying opportunities and barriers to sustainable use and taking action to address identified issues like Carleen spoke about earlier. It's about looking at the opportunities you have to work with others. You might be taking forward a project anyway, and if you think about what neighbouring organisations are, what other organisations that are in that place, what their needs and aspirations might be, it's a really good starting point. And it's about exploring other governance structures as well. You know, it's an opportunity to look at how are things managed, who makes the decisions, who has a say in this, can communities be involved in any kind of democratic processes. So there's a strong connection there to things like community empowerment, participation request, asset transfer. And in the Commission, we have, I mentioned earlier, we have protocols. We do have a protocol on diversification, and it is something we can help you with, answer questions about. And we also have a route map, and it ties in with diversification and with community ownership. And that's aimed at people who own and manage land who are looking to diversify. It's a route map that takes you through how it's happening. Has somebody approached you? Is it a proactive approach you're taking? What might the next steps be? And just to help you with those processes and those decisions and figuring out what you should be doing around that. So the next principle I'll speak about is community ownership. So like I've said, these two do tie together really closely. So the principle on community ownership is that more communities should have the opportunity to own, lease or use buildings and land which can contribute to their community's well-being and future development. So community ownership and use of land and buildings can support well-being and resilience by giving local people the opportunity to identify and respond to their own needs and the chance to benefit from the income that's generated too. It can offer communities the chance to provide local housing, business opportunities, community facilities, recreation facilities, green space and other services that benefit local people. And who better to know what services are needed in the area but the people who live there and work there and spend their time in that area. So there are different routes for communities to take on ownership and management of land, including legislative routes. We've got community right to buy, the community right to buy for abandoned, neglected and detrimental land, community right to buy for sustainable development, and of course asset transfer. So when it comes to community ownership, if you move on to the next slide, Kathie. What you can do really for community ownership, again, we've got a protocol and we've got some guidance on our website. We've got some case studies there too, but it's about proactively supporting communities to identify where access to land and buildings could meet their needs and aspirations. And we've touched this morning on planning and communities having input there. It's about understanding what is it that's needed, what does the community want, what do they feel the gaps are, and is there something you could do, whether it's looking at the buildings you own or thinking about something like stalled spaces where it's an interim use, where you could help them to meet their needs. It's identifying and supporting suitable opportunities for communities to take on or be involved in the reuse of land. Linda had said earlier, communities shouldn't be expected to or made to take on any asset just because. It should be the asset that's right for them. It shouldn't be that there's a threat of something being removed if the community wouldn't take control of it. That's not the right way to do things. And then it's also about when communities are interested in owning, leasing or using sites, giving them sufficient time to develop projects and securing funding. There can be issues from landowners or managers of any kind really putting pressure on communities, expecting things to be done within a certain time frame, and maybe not appreciating that quite often it is volunteers who are working on the community side of things. You know, they will have day jobs, they will have other commitments and other responsibilities, and it's not something they're working on full time. So it is completely reasonable to give them a bit of time and space, but also to give them that support and communicate with them, share information and make the process as easy as possible and as clear as possible. So that's something that's really important. So we'll move on now to good stewardship. So this is principle 4 in the statement, and this is that the holders of land rights should exercise these rights in ways that take account of the responsibilities to meet high standards of land ownership, management and use. Acting as stewards of Scotland's land resource for future generations, they contribute to sustainable growth and a modern, successful country. So the principle, along with our associated protocol and guidance, promotes good stewardship and high standards of management, and that is in an urban and a rural setting. So decisions that are made with a focus on good stewardship really take into consideration the long-term needs of local communities and look at public benefits that are delivered in support of wider national outcomes. And that is economic, social, cultural, environmental benefits, not just a kind of narrowly focused view. So positive long-term and strategic land planning, which considers and contributes to broader sustainable economic development and public delivery of public benefits, is an important part of managing land for the future. So proactive estate management is a great way to do this, and it's something we'll be talking about in more detail next week if you want to join us. It helps ensure we're making the most of our land and building assets using what are finite and valuable resources for public benefit. And it also helps with the prioritisation of resources, identifying opportunities to make better use of sites, preventing vacant and derelict land, taking those proactive steps to stop land from reaching that condition, and ensuring that assets are used to add value and meet the needs of your organisation, but also of the wider community. So really, it's about promoting the sustainable development of land by contributing to better and more productive economic, social, cultural and environmental outcomes, and in general, considering public good, as well as the good of those who own the land. So what you can do in a stewardship setting, if we move on to the next slide, other than having a look at our protocol and thinking about the expectations set out in that and how you might take those forward. You can look at how you take decisions and take and implement decisions about use of land that, as I've mentioned, consider the broadest impacts and benefits, taking a really holistic view. And we'll hear a bit more about that in the tools that Kathie discusses in a minute, how you can take that fullest view of considering reuse of a site. It's about regularly assessing whether the land and buildings that you do own are being maintained and being used in ways that support sustainable development, looking at opportunities and barriers to more sustainable use and what you can do to tackle those issues. Developing proactive estate management strategies, so you can identify properties that are at risk of becoming surplus requirements and think ahead about how you might take those. And for those of you who weren't able to join us last week, you wouldn't have heard Anna Tozer talking about the Mid-Mills building in Inverness. It's a great example of thinking ahead and of different parties coming together to look at how a site was used, but we will have a recording available of that, so it's worth catching up on. And it's about where property has become vacant, taking action to make sure that the site and property is maintained and in a reasonable condition whilst land and buildings are awaiting reuse and development. So now the penultimate principle I'll speak about is transparency. So this is about information about the ownership, use and management of land and making sure that it's available, it's clear and it contains relevant details. So it's been recognised a lack of transparency about land ownership and land use decision making is a barrier to dialogue and progress. Information about land and buildings provides the foundation for open and transparent decision making. So it is a really important aspect of land use and ownership. So what you can do for that is gathering information, really understanding what you own, how it's being used and what the options are, what the opportunities are. Sharing that information with other key stakeholders, and that's something we'll pick up on when we talk about community wealth building, is that collaboration element is really important, and you can share information with other stakeholders, other bodies, and identify options to work together. It's being open about how your land and buildings are used and publishing information on your website. Also about your decision-making processes. We've seen in the chat there's been a bit of frustration about some situations with public bodies where things haven't gone the way that communities have expected, and that sharing information about that process and how that's going to be communicated is really important. And again, having appointed contacts so people know who to speak to about specific issues and they're not running around the houses and constantly getting knocked back because they're speaking to the wrong person, and about taking advantage of the voluntary registration processes with Registrars of Scotland. And then that takes us on to Principle 6, which is a particularly important one, and one that we've spoken about a lot today, given that the focus is on collaborating with communities, is that there should be greater collaboration and community engagement in decisions about land. So what you can do, really, and we've picked up on some of these lessons already, so we've moved to the next slide. It's about engaging early. You know, I think Nick Wright had touched this morning that you don't want to approach a community with proposals, with plans, knowing that your decisions are made. It's about getting them involved at a stage when they can influence what's happening. It helps to create proactive engagement plans, and we have some great resources for this on our website. We have a route map for community engagement to help you figure out whether the decisions you're making are significant and what level of engagement might be proportionate. And we've got some engagement plan templates and some supporting documents there to help you with those. It's about building relationships through regular communication. Don't just wait until you've got a major project or decision or something has gone wrong or something is happening. It's about having that two-way conversation and really listening to communities. And it's offering communities a genuine way to share their views on a regular basis. We've touched on some issues this morning about community engagement, but it helps if communities know what the engagement's about, that it's genuine and that they really are being heard. And then it's about thinking about how people are affected, how people affected by your decisions could get more involved. So I'll touch on some of the benefits of community engagement briefly, and that's about it's really that it helps to build trust between landowners, managers, communities and others. It builds positive cooperative working relationships. It helps foster mutual understanding where there are issues. It can lead to creative and innovative solutions, ideas that you haven't thought of, particularly when we come to that kind of place-based development. If a community lives in a place, they'll know a lot about it. They'll know the nuances and the issues, and it's really valuable to have that input. And fundamentally, it secures better economic, environmental and social and cultural outcomes for all parties. So my final slide before I hand you over to Kathie to talk specifically about our tools and resources for vacant and derelict land is just to highlight our self-assessments process. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a framework that's based on principles of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, and we have a pilot process at the moment, and assessing the way you own, manage and use land against the principles of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement really offers a great opportunity to improve your understanding of the principles, look at how they can apply in your context. It's great to stop and take stock of these things, and you can identify the things that you do really, really well, these fantastic examples and case studies that we've been talking about, and how you can share those with other people. And it allows you to identify areas where you could do things better, so that you can plan ahead, you can take steps to improve those issues. And at the moment, it is a pilot process, and it's something where you can provide feedback to us and provide feedback on the statement and look at how it's using. So we are looking for participants. Just a little plug for anyone, particularly from a public body. If you're interested in having a discussion about this approach, talking a bit more about it and how it might work, what it requires practically, then please do get in touch after the session. So on to you, Kathie.
Thank you very much. So now, from that sort of big picture of land rights and responsibilities, let's talk about 5 tools, an exciting new one that we're launching today that can help tackle vacant derelict lands and might be of interest to local authorities. And like with all these tools and approaches, we really appreciate feedback. So if you have used it and it's worked well, or there's ways to improve it, please do get in touch. We're really keen to hear from you. So as you probably know by now, Scotland has over 10,000 hectares of vacant derelict land. That's almost 2 times the size of Dundee. And a third of the Scottish population lives within 500 metres of a derelict site, and that increases in areas with higher multiple deprivation. It's all incredibly different, different challenges, different sizes, and therefore it's really important that we take a place-based approach and collaborate with communities to bring forward some of these sites. And hopefully the tools really embed that place principle and the place-based working. So as the task force developed its recommendations, we took a look at the vacant and derelict land register, which I'd say is perhaps the first tool. It's not one of my 5, but the Scottish Government centrally held register of vacant and derelict sites over 0.1 hectares. And we looked at sites that had been stuck since the 2000s or earlier. And another phrase that you'll hear us talk about a lot is the DUSTEs, the derelict urban sites that have been laying unused since the 2000s and earlier. So these are the permanent residents of that vacant derelict land register. And a bit more analysis of those sites has shown that these are some of the most challenging, potentially the most harmful, and just very stuck sites. And they tend to cluster in areas of multiple deprivation. And we believe that these should be prioritised. And the Vacant Derelict Land Task Force actually put them forward as national developments for the new NPF4 National Planning Framework. So the first of the tools is actually this DUSTE map, and by magic you should get a link to that in the chat. And what we did is we worked with the Green Action Trust and SEPA and all of you local authorities here today to look at your DUSTEs, look at those long-term sites and actually start to categorise whether there has been some activity, whether there's no activity, where nature is starting to reclaim them, or where they have been brought back into use, and linking those to case studies. So we've been engaging with local authorities to try and sort of start looking at the productive potential of these sites. So for example, where there is some greening or rewilding of those sites taking place, maybe in collaboration with community, you identify actually that this could be a suitable site for growing spaces, or like we saw this morning, the Baltic Street Playground. So we really hope that this map is a good example of what could be done and the productive potential of some of these sites. That's tool number 1. Of course, we know that not all of the DUSTEs reflect the actual scale of problematic sites in Scotland. As I said, the Vacant Derelict Land Register doesn't include sites under 0.1 hectares, and there are other sites that are just simply not recorded on the register. So that's an area of reform. But in the meantime, there are definitely things that you can do to tackle sites that aren't categorised as vacant derelict land, but are potentially just problematic buildings or land in your area. And so this is where the community impact tool comes in. So the community impact tool is based on a bit of research done by Stantec, Kevin Murray Associates and Glasgow Caledonian University. And it looked at the different impacts that vacant derelict land has on communities. And those 4 themes here, so impact on the sense of community and sort of community cohesion, impact on health and well-being, environmental impacts and economic missed opportunities, are all the sort of the impacts that these sites could have on communities, and conversely could be opportunities to bring that site into a more productive use. So we believe that this tool, which is a survey, can help support that evidence gathering for interventions, could support feasibility studies, funding applications, could support local place planning processes, as well as prioritising any intervention on those sites by a local authority. So this is just briefly what the survey looks like. It breaks it down. I think it's 8 questions that you can use as part of local planning processes, developing community action plans. And I think we have some feedback from previous users of the tool that said that they found it really helpful. So again, please, by magic, it should be in the box, but please do feedback if you've used this or are keen to use it. We're really interested in your experience. But essentially what it should do, it should tally up the results after having engaged with the community and start categorising the site by how much of a priority it is for reuse and the type of impact it has. So this tool can really help with your prioritisation processes. So the next tool I'm going to briefly talk about is the considering the wider benefits of reuse appraisal tool. It's a very long word, but essentially it's just an additional tool alongside traditional mechanisms such as the Scottish Public Finance Manual and other appraisal guidance that help us think about the longer term benefits of reusing those sites. So you might find this particularly useful if you're making the case for intervention at a strategic level and say at a committee, or trying to demonstrate that some of these sites wouldn't actually come forward through markets, the market wouldn't develop in these areas, but actually if you start thinking about the longer term benefits of those sites in terms of climate change, tackling health and well-being, and supporting, for example, the COVID recovery we had this morning about how spaces have been used differently. So there are so many social and wider benefits beyond just financial value that these sites can bring. And so this tool really should help you build that case for intervention at a strategic level. And so we've got some examples here. That's the guidance in the corner there. It talks you through the process, and here are some of the case studies that go alongside that. I think case studies are another really useful tool, and there's plenty of those on our website, but these are examples of perhaps some of the non-financial benefits, although you could start attributing some costs to that as well. But yeah, that you might find this as a local authority practitioner really helpful to make the case internally and bring it straight to the more strategic level. I think the bottom left is actually Baltic Street Playground. Yeah, just some examples there. So the third tool is a funding review of all the different funds available for different stakeholders, different actors, and you'll be pleased to know there's a lot out there. We undertook the first of these reviews and produced a toolkit in 2019, and we've just done a repeat of that to reflect the Vacant Derelict Land Investment Programme, which the Scottish Government launched as a response to the Vacant Derelict Land Task Force recommendations. And you can go back to week 1 to hear the Scottish Government and some case studies talking about their experience of this fund. But the good news is that there is a lot of funding out there that can complement potential existing funding routes, and it might be useful for you as a local authority to help signpost these to community groups or others that are interested in taking forward land reuse projects. And this is very briefly what the table looks like, and the full report actually talks you through the different funds in more detail. But yes, it's a very useful 4 or 5 page resource that you might want to share with communities. Oh, the big reveal. I've jumped the gun here. Here's the big reveal. This is our final tool today that we're launching, which is the Vacant Derelict Land Community Route Map. Now, this is a tool that it's a click-through website. It's on our My Land website, and essentially it helps communities navigate the process of from start to finish, what to do if they've identified a vacant derelict site, and whether they want to take it forward for reuse, or whether it's simply a problematic site and they want the local authority to do something about it. But it should be a walk through the process of how communities can help bring forward vacant and derelict land. And there's a lot of information under each of these pages. It's user friendly, so we've trialed it with a few people, and it again, keen to get your feedback. However, but yeah, we're launching this today. It should be in the chat, so please do have a look, and we hope you find this useful. So you can find out more on our website, Transforming Vacant and Derelict Land. It has all the links that I've spoken about today, and we will be sending it out as a resource after the event. So that's very briefly a whistle-stop tour through the different tools and approaches that we think can help local authorities and communities and others work more collaboratively. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kathie. That was really interesting, and it was a real counter. Thanks very much, Kathie and Gemma. It was a real counter through all the tools and facilities that the Land Commission has to offer, as well as the research that you've done over the past years. And I suppose if there's any questions from the audience, put them in the chat box. But I suppose a question to the audience about the whole of the morning is there anything you've heard that you think will change the way you work, or that will influence your practice? And if you want to put it in the chat, it would be interesting for that to be shared at this point. But I suppose the question I have, I suppose, for the Land Commission is, these are excellent tools, and you're getting thanks for them in the chat there. My predecessor at SURF would say we've got policy coming, we've got good policy coming out of our ears, we don't need new policy. And I suppose, thinking about some of this, what we've heard so far today, how do you think we can improve or what do we need to do collectively to improve how good stewardship of land buildings is delivered? We have good advice, when we have good case studies. What do you think we need to do to make it be delivered more consistently across different local authorities?
Perhaps I'll start, and then you can come in. Actually, there's a really interesting bit of work that Gemma and I have both been doing with the NHS Scotland estate, and I think we've got a real opportunity for the public sector to lead on this. And I think it's really positive to see that the NHS sustainability and climate change strategy, which actually closes today, the draft consultation closes today, actually talks about land rights and responsibilities and embedding this approach. So it's almost like a two-pronged approach to embedding this in policy and strategy and having the tools to deliver on this. So I think, yeah, I would just say leadership is a really big opportunity and to help shape that culture that we all need to prevent this legacy of derelict land being created in the first place. Don't know if Gemma wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, I agree with what you said there, Kathie, and I think it is I think it's really important as well for people to be really kind of open to challenge and to think about the way they do things, rather than, you know, doing something because it's the way that you've always done it. It's about questioning, well, you know, what improvements could we make? Who could we speak to? What could we learn? It's, yeah, I think it can take a bit of work really to take that approach and to be open to doing things in a new way. It can be a bit risky sometimes as well, maybe a bit scary, to have to deal with the unknown like that. But I think it's something, you know, we can see all the challenges that we've got, but also some of the fantastic things we can happen when people do have that kind of courage and that spirit to come and try something new and to do something that's a bit different, even if it's only different in that area. You know, I think that's a really important aspect of it.
Okay, so
can I come back in, Ewan?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually just while I'm thinking about it, I think next week we'll talk about collaboration, and this is sort of looking at how different agencies can take a more collaborative approach to potentially de-risk sites. And I know that the key agencies group have done the key planning statutory agencies. They're doing great work, I think in East Ayrshire and other parts of Scotland, to look at the issues related to an area and help identify who can take that forward. So again, that's that public sector led approach. And then on the back of that, communities can start to co-produce plans, and the private sector can also come in. But I think, yeah, so week 3 we'll talk about that. And then in week 4, we've got a few innovative approaches by different local authorities and how they're weaving these approaches into other strategies such as housing or town centre regeneration. So I think there's a lot of great stuff happening, which hopefully this month showcases as well. So you're not alone in sort of pioneering this.
I suppose picking up on comments that you've both made, this morning there has been a focus on local authorities because of the nature of the discussion. But obviously, they're not just the only public stakeholders in this. There's a significant number of other public bodies who have influence or control and own land and buildings. And I think you mentioned the fact that the NHS have incorporated this into their strategies now. That's really welcome to hear. Are all the public bodies or quasi-public bodies, I suppose the Scottish Canals are a good example of, to me, a public body with a massive bit of infrastructure that has done really superb work with communities, for communities, that has been really interesting to watch. It's been award-winning. But are there other public bodies that you think still have a bit to go on being as open as some public bodies are to sort of engaging with communities?
Yeah, I think Vicky's picked up on a good point in the chat there, that really in terms of community wealth building, the kind of organisations you're referring to are anchor institutions, and they can play a really important part in a local place, often with, you know, significant power over jobs and spending and services. So it is something, you know, with community wealth building, we've acknowledged that local authorities are the ones who have really led on it. They've led the charge. They've taken the first steps. And there are some great examples, North Ayrshire in particular, where they're bringing lots of other people along with them. The Ayrshire Community Wealth Building Commission now incorporates South Ayrshire and East Ayrshire, but there's also representation there from the third sector, from Police Scotland, from Scottish Fire and Rescue Services, from the NHS and the local colleges and universities. So I think it is something that we are seeing some really great progress on that. The enterprise agencies are also great at supporting these kind of things, but as always with the work that we do in good practice, there is still quite a bit of awareness raising to do, even before we get to that embedding stage of embedding the good practice and encouraging people to take action on these. So yeah, I think it's something that there are a lot of good examples of, but still a way to go.
Right. Okay, that's fine. I think I suppose we're all aware of public bodies that have stuff that they're maybe not doing something with, and we're not at the early stages of this, but we are, I suppose, still looking for. We're still pushing further. To me, it was interesting to reflect. I've paid quite a lot of, sorry to hark on about NPF4, the draft national planning framework, but listening to the examination of it in the Scottish Parliament at every session, stewardship of our existing, not the new stuff that we need, but everything that we already have, the sort of stewardship of that is certainly something that comes up from all the politicians, and then talking about things within their own constituency where they have neglect at different scales and needing to address that, as well as I suppose bring in approaches that prevent that sort of thing from happening, which is I think what you were talking about with the issue of people thinking long term before they're disposing of assets about what the disposal means. And I suppose from my old job's perspective, and I suppose a group that I'm sitting on just now is looking at what the disposal of religious assets is going to look like across Scotland, because that's another set of a type of building that has historic interest, but it also has high community interest in these places as well. And I suppose it's thinking about how primarily the Church of Scotland is going to be handling its disposal of that. And clearly some of it's put out some, in Edinburgh at least, it's put out some early information about some of its proposals, which has proven to land in the press and a bit controversial. But to me, it's that transparency thing, that as early as possible, people knowing that these things are maybe going to be happening.
Actually, the very purpose of planning is now managing the long-term public interest in land, and I think this is where land rights and responsibilities can be really helpful to realising that, actually.
Yes, we've got, Sheena's put some other links into that around community wealth building, and community wealth building, I should say, from a CERF perspective, we're looking at setting up a community wealth building network for community groups to understand better about what community wealth building means in a smaller scale, not just from a public sector perspective. We'll be looking to roll that out next year. It's 28 minutes past 12. Is there any final words from Kathie or Gemma before I wind up?
You know I'm going to say yes. Just wanted to pick up on Ian Wardrop's point about there being funding for dealing with vacant dirt land for local authorities to access. That is the new vacant, I think, Ian, you're talking about the new vacant dirt land investment programme, and you're right in highlighting that. And the key, I think the sort of additionality of this fund, the key difference is that it's very much focusing on local authorities leading on the application, but we're really looking at the community involvement in that application and working in partnership with others. So looking at the multiple benefits, the win-wins that these projects can bring. So that's included in the resource pack as well, the link to the fund, but there's plenty of good examples and successful bidders as well. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathie. So thank you very much, Kathie and Gemma, for presenting that. And thank you very much to all the speakers that we've had this morning: Linda Gillespie, Nick Wright, Rachel Cooper, Carleen Doherty, Sheena Boyd, Gillian Dick. It's been great to have all your contributions of really constructive and positive things around community engagement on this topic. And thank you very much to all those in the audience who've contributed to the chat and so on. I think what we've heard this morning has been fairly consistent messages, and I suppose while we've looked at tools at the end of this morning, I suppose primarily the thing that we need is resource, and that resource is both human resource and financial resource, and we need people there to use the tools that are available. And I think it made me, while Kathie and Gemma were presenting, I did remember I had seen something very recently, no, we're not saying that Glasgow Council are perfect, but Glasgow Council, people might be aware that there's a place commission being going on within Glasgow for the past couple of years, and a draft document is going to a council committee, I think, this week, and I've had a glance at it. So it's not the final recommendations of the Place Commission. However, it does have an example of something that it would like to propose, and it's saying, for example, so this may not be what the Place Commission proposes, but it does say, for example, establishing a small action-oriented organisation with an independent board and call-off panels of place advisors and place enablers. The former drawn from Glasgow City Council and Housing Association on secondment, and the latter drawn from the design community. And so using a talent pool that may already exist. That issue of putting sort of place advisor, place enabler, that's kind of what we've been talking about this morning, having people like Carleen helping communities, enabling communities to do things, but having those placed across local authorities. It wouldn't happen for free. It would need resource to do it. But in the long term, if it helps communities take control, ownership, management of the places in which they live to improve the outcomes for their communities, that's the sort of thing that I'm hearing from the audience this morning. And the fact that that also mentions secondment harks back to Sheena's idea of volunteers being able to work in the council for a period or experience that, and for council officers or public body officers to work in community groups and to be able to improve their own expertise through that form of learning. So there's a consistency there with people. The Place Commission is maybe coming from quite a specific design perspective, but nonetheless, the notion that there should be people embedded in communities, working with communities, supporting the communities to meet their aims is something that I think most planners would also want to uphold, and we can deliver the difference that we're all wanting to see. So thank you very much again for everyone's contributions this morning. And I could chat longer and give a review of it, but it's very close to lunchtime. So I think we will draw the morning session to a close.